Hello friends, and welcome to the next tutorial in the Fantasy Armor series. This time, we'll be making an articulated female breastplate. The goal for this piece was a balance of feminine features and plausible armor. But if you prefer a more revealing look, this design is also modular, so layers can be removed to reveal more if you prefer. This guide is made possible in part thanks to Weaver Leather. I've been ordering leather and tools from Weaver for many years, and it's great to be working with them now in this next round of video projects. They have an online store full of quality products with great prices and fast shipping. They also have great customer service and experts on staff that can answer any leathercraft related questions. The leather and a number of the tools demonstrated in this video are Weaver products. I'll leave an affiliate link below so you can check out all the cool stuff in their online store for yourself. The tutorials in the Fantasy Armor series are designed to be beginner friendly, and each tutorial will add new options and ideas that you can use in making your own projects. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future tutorials and project builds. By now, I'm sure you'll know my typical medium of choice is leather, so that's what I'll be demonstrating here, though you may adapt this to other mediums if you prefer. You can skip ahead a bit if you want to get straight to the build. If you are following along with the patterns, the first thing you want to do is print them out. Just make sure you check the option to print as tiled pages. If your PDF program does not have this option, you might look up a free option called Foxit Reader. Once the pages are printed, you'll need to combine them into one larger sized pattern. Most printers will leave some sort of margin that will need to be overlapped or trimmed. One shortcut to this is to trim small segments of the margin away exactly to the line where the pages will meet up. The lines of the pattern should flow in a consistent way, then tape them together using the tape of your choice. You can use scissors or a razor blade to cut out the pieces from there. Before you start tracing these patterns out, always make a mock-up. It's fine to just use poster board or cheap foam or whatever else you have available, just as long as you can test the general fit. For reference, the dimensions of the mannequin used in this video were set to 35, 28, 36, and the armor should comfortably fit within several inches of this range with little to no adjustment. If you do need to adjust for fit, start by scaling the entire pattern up or down first to fit your frame. Normally a small percentage adjustment is fine. Adjust the length of the side plates in or out according to your measurements. The leather being used here is a Herman Oak 10 to 11 ounce side from Weaver Leather, and you can use heavier or lighter weights according to your needs. When you have your patterns ready, you can lay them out and start tracing. Just make sure to leave yourself room to mirror the front and back pieces. When that's done, I'll begin separating the leather into manageable chunks with a utility knife. Off camera, I submerge the chunks into water for about 4 seconds per piece to aid in cutting and upcoming steps. Wetting the leather makes the cutting process easier. I'm using some very sharp Ginger shears from Weaver. It doesn't matter too much what you use to cut out the leather. Just try to focus on making your cuts clean and perpendicular. With the leather still slightly damp from the previous stage, I'll begin to transfer the design lines and holes to the leather pieces using a ballpoint pen to trace over the lines. I'm using the initial prototype in this video, so your patterns may differ very slightly. If you haven't seen the previous tutorials, I'll mention again that the design lines that I provide in the patterns are optional. You can use them, or you can come up with your own variations. It's completely up to you. When transferring the designs, I do not transfer all of the borders, as I can use a compass to mark a more consistent borderline. Instead, I just focus on marking the barbs and other design lines. You can also use an edge groover for your border lines as well. Now I'll go ahead and punch the holes needed for the pieces. I was sent this Heritage Tools rotary hand punch to use, and I'm really impressed with it. I've owned quite a few rotary punches, but this is the first time seeing one with a force multiplier like this. Punching through thicker leathers can be a challenge, but this one makes it a lot easier. There will of course still be times where the hole is too far in, and you just have to use a normal punch there. Next I'll be committing the design lines. My go-to for this is a swivel knife with a ceramic blade. Always make sure your blade is sharp and strop it before beginning. That just means to buff the edge against leather loaded with white buffing compound. And for most people, the struggles they have with carving very often come down to dull and unpolished blades. It can also come down to the leather being either too wet or too dry. There are other methods for design lines, but the deep sharp lines give a good contrast that works for many projects. I always like to bevel the edges of projects. A size 2 or 3 is fine for this leather. As you can see, it just removes the corner from the edges of the leather. As each piece is worked on, I'll be burnishing the edges. This compresses and smooths the edge fibers, but I've covered this on a few occasions in previous tutorials, so rewind a bit if you haven't seen those yet. I decided to go for a slightly more elaborate tooling on this one compared to previous ones. I'm working on some standalone tooling guide videos, and I'll be going into greater detail for this technique and for the previous tutorial. Initially, it was my intention to demonstrate and explain new techniques in each tutorial, but the flaw I discovered there beyond making the tutorial videos much longer is that not everyone will watch every tutorial, or want to, and there are a lot of these techniques that would otherwise be missed. And it's also problematic to have people go hunt through previous tutorials for older techniques. So what I'm going for now is to eventually have a full catalog of standalone crafting techniques, like a library that you can pull from and use in whatever project you want. I'll still be doing the new techniques with each tutorial, and ideally be building towards more and more advanced designs. They will just be separated and chronicled a little bit better, and I'll spend a little bit more time delving into each technique specifically. So if you're not subscribed and getting alerts for the channel and you want to see how this particular effect is done in greater detail, please subscribe now. I'll be glad to share this technique used in this video with you and much more. Now the pieces need to be shaped a bit. To do that, the leather has to be wet. Getting the right consistency is something you'll get the feel for in time, but just try for a medium dampness where the surface has begun to dry back out. A few of the cut pieces require a sharp upward bend in the leather so that it can be cleanly paired with the bodice base. The trick I use here is to use a pair of pliers and leverage it along the line. As long as you don't clamp past the line, it will not harm the visuals, as this portion will be covered by the bodice base. You're mainly creating a sort of stress line. This helps you form a crisp inner edge in the leather. From here, you'll want to stretch out the newly formed tabs out a bit, as this will help start the compound shape needed to fit multiple parts together. To make the forming process easier, you will want to find some sort of spherical object, whether it's a dedicating forming tool like I have here, or a baseball or softball or acrylic hemisphere, just anything to help you stretch the leather a bit. Most of the other tutorials have had wet forming as an optional step. In this case, it is a bit more important, otherwise the fit will not look good. It may require some practice attempts, so just start with the smaller parts and test pairing them until you are happy with the result. If you can master this technique, you can use it to great advantage in your future projects. I'll just shape the pieces bit by bit until they pair up nicely. Once I near the final stages, I'll use clamps and placeholder rivets to double check the fit and alignment of everything. The color combo for this project will be purple with a subtle darkened edge gradient and finished up with a metallic gold trim. For the dye, I'm using a Fibings purple leather dye. I find this dye to be a bit on the dark side by default, so I'm also using some of their solvent to reduce the purple a bit. I'm doing this by eye, but if you're not used to doing it this way, I suggest a more precise measurement. To apply the dye, I'm using some dressing fleece. I'll apply the dye to both sides of the leather and go for a good saturation throughout. Next, I'll apply the dye to the buckles. One other quick tip I should mention is about working with the purple dye. You'll have noticed the gloves have a yellow golden hue. If you see this hue, don't worry about it. It'll go away when you apply your leather finish. Now we'll talk about the gradient. I'll be adding some gold trim, and I want the contrast to pop a bit more. So I'll be doing a manual gradient along the edges. I know that not everybody has access to an airbrush, so I wanted to demonstrate this way first, but if you do own one, feel free to use that instead. When I'm doing a gradient, I'll usually mix colors instead of going for a harsh transition like straight to black. It depends of course on what you're going for, but this method is definitely easier to control, and you can go in layers, so if it's not dark enough you can keep adding the layers to darken it more. So to do this, I just take a little black dye and pour some in. I decided this first mix was a little too heavy on the black, so I added a bit more purple in a reducer to compensate. I'll then use the dressing fleece and start by saturating the outer edge first and build up the dark. Then I'll start dabbing from the edge and go in bit by bit. Since the mix is not too dark, it lets me build up the layers of the pigment because dark colors always dominate the lighter ones when it comes to dyeing leather. leather finish. Next, we need to seal the leather. For this, I'll be using Weaver's Tough Coat, which provides a nice surface finish and helps prevent the dye from bleeding. It also makes the pieces weather resistant and also helps firm up the leather. For the buckle straps, I just dip them in quickly, though I would actually advise either a lighter coat or a different finish to avoid hardening your straps too much. For the breastplate pieces, I'll use a piece of sponge to saturate the pieces with Tough Coat. And I'll often buff it in with a little pressure. That can help break away any loose extra pigment on the surface. After it has had a little bit of time to absorb but is still damp, I'll wring out the sponge and give a quick pass to smooth out the surface finish. To paint the gold edge, I'll be using some Angelus metallic gold acrylic paint. I'll also be using the Angelus brushes. I haven't tried these brushes before, but I really like them. I ended up using the round brush for most of the painting. After loading the brush with paint, I will normally brush out most of the paint on scrap paper, but not quite as much as would be considered dry brushing. I just did 2 careful medium coats and touch-ups beyond that. Now we have finally arrived to the assembly phase of the project. To join the pieces, I'm using long and medium rivets from Weaver. These are my favorite double cap rivets, and I was very glad when they started carrying them, as well as the black buckles. I just really like the way they look. I will start with the smaller cut pieces and work my way out from there. As you are joining the pieces, you may have to exert a little bit of force to make the leather cooperate and line up. It can be advantageous to work on the assembly phase while the leather is still a little damp from the finish stage. Something to keep in mind is that everyone will have different types of leather and will tool it differently, and will be wet forming it differently, and so on. All of these things will slightly affect the dimensions of the leather, thus the hole placements for the rivets can slightly creep out of alignment, so you may have to square things back up a little. It's also okay if you need to adjust the hole placement, but do so sparingly as it could create a ripple effect of alignment issues as you are assembling the pieces. If you are crafting this and you find yourself a little overwhelmed at this assembly stage or the wet forming stage, what I suggest you do is trace out a few of the smaller pieces from this pattern in a portion of the breastplate base, and just use those as sacrificial test pieces. Don't bother with the fancy tooling or anything else, just focus on shaping and assembly. Once you get confidence there, then move on to final assembly. I'll also be skiving some of the overlapping areas to make it a bit easier to rivet and also to reduce sharp edges on the inside that would be uncomfortable when worn. the back plate is much easier to assemble.
Next we'll be needing a retaining strap to connect all the segmented layers and let everything compress and twist and allow easy mobility. Unless of course you want to just wear the top portion only, in which case skip ahead to the strap section. For the retaining straps, I like to use something firm but supple. Something heavy enough to not stretch and distort too much, but also something that has a little give, so it is still comfortable and lets the connected components move fluidly. I'm just cutting out a 3/4 inch wide strap and will mark the holes according to their pattern reference. Then I will start from the bottom plate and set the rivets connecting the strap to the plate. I will work my way up plate by plate. The only thing left to assemble is the buckle straps at this stage. I went for 3/4 inch buckles here. I'll add the buckle to each strap and set the rivets there. If you need more guidance for buckles, please refer a couple videos back where I go over how-to for buckles and include a free link to a PDF guide that has tons of interesting examples you can play with. As to the buckle placements, it'll be much like the previous Kiros tutorial. I do suggest you wear whatever garb you intend to wear under the breastplate and mark your buckle placements accordingly from there. Also, since the plates are somewhat narrow, try to place your buckles down low on each plate except for the top plate where you'll shoot for the middle. As a side point, if you intend to wear this over your skin and no other garb, you might consider lining the leather with something soft to increase comfort. While the buckle placements do not have to be perfect since you'll have a lot of adjustment potential, it still helps to center the buckles along a default setting, and you'll easily have room to contract or to expand should the need arise. Just as a tip for you, one possible time-saving route to figure out the placements of the buckles is to first go ahead and attach all of the front tongue ends to the front breastplate pieces. Then feed all of your buckle ends onto the tongues at a suitable middle point on the strap. Then, ideally with the help of a friend, go plate by plate and mark your hole placements for the buckle strap ends from there. Just make sure to do so evenly or it can pull the front of your piece out of center. To attach all the buckles and set the rivets, I decided to have a whack with this comically large Acme-inspired cartoon mallet that Weaver sent me for this project. It's a Berry King mallet. It's actually glorious. I rate it 5 out of 5 whacks. I appreciate you coming this far into the video. That alone makes it worth it for me. I also want to extend thanks to my patrons for helping to make these videos possible. It's no secret that I have a lot of tools, and you'll see me use all sorts of them throughout these videos, and I'll be promoting some of the shiny new ones along the way as well. But I just want to remind you that if you are starting out, not to get discouraged based on the overwhelming quantity of possible tools and supplies that exist. Nobody starts out with all of these tools, and even if they did, there's no way they would put them all to good use.
Remember that past videos as well as future ones will be demonstrating other tools and alternate methods if you do not have the exact tools that I use. I already have one video in the Getting Started series and more will be coming along the way. And I'll also be putting out more free patterns at some point so I can help as many people as possible get started with crafting, whether it's leatherwork or otherwise. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and you can get some extra content if you want to join us on Patreon. Thanks for coming along. I'm glad you could be here and hope to see you next time.